The Alpha King said, touch her again and die. When my uncle slapped me. The king snapped. Chapter 1, Charcoal Wings in a Locked Room. In the tallest gable of Drev Manor, tucked behind a warped door and a ladder that bit splinters, Leora Vale drew herself a forest she could breathe in. Charcoal smudged her fingertips, her cuffs, the edge of her jaw. On scavenged paper, a wolf sprang from shadow into silver-leaf trees, a sky like spilled milk, a river that ran bright and fast because she said so. Out there, life moved by her uncle's ledgers, duties, dowries, debts. In here, the air smelled of dry wood and old linen, and her pencil made a music no one could punish. The floorboard groaned outside. He never climbed the ladder, he summoned. Today, bootsteps ascended. The door slammed, rattling the glass in the one small window. Lord Cashandrev filled the threshold like a bad verdict, coat immaculate, smile a comma hooked into cruelty. Still hiding in flimsy worlds, girl? His gaze skimmed her drawing, lip curling. Your parents spent their lives holding this pack's borders. And you, his fingers flicked toward the paper, indulge in dust. Leora pressed her hands behind her back to hide the trembling. Silence was armor, words only made better weapons for him. Enough pretend, he said, voice sharpening. The capital has summoned you. Pack court. The court? The lamp flame wavered with her breath. Omegas didn't stand beneath the council's banners. They scurried between kitchens and commands. Cashin savored her shock. Perhaps your insolence found the right ears. Dress. Try not to smudge yourself with fantasies. He left the door yawning. Sunlight no longer warmed the room, it only showed how much dust there was to choke on. Leora packed small, a comb, a spool of blue thread, a stub of charcoal worn into the shape of her grip, and a folded page where a wolf ran the way she wished she could. Down in the yard, the household lined up like cutlery. Carriages black as wells. The road unspooled toward the city in a gray ribbon. As the manor shrank behind them, Leora looked once at the attic window and imagined a wolf leaping out of it into her forest. The fantasy landed hard in her ribs and stayed there, an ember she couldn't quite crush. Chapter 2, The Hall That Makes You Small. The court's great hall had been carved to humble men. Vaulted ribs vanished into shadow, stone gargoyles watched from cornices, patient as predators. Banners hung like nightfall. The air tasted of beeswax and old blood. Every footstep multiplied. Cashin guided Leora to the center circle beneath the council dais. He did not touch her, he never needed to when the whole room moved for him. Whispers slid down the tiered benches. An Omega? Why? Drev's ward, he keeps strays. Barely a wolf. Leora lowered her gaze to a crack in the floor, a crooked vein in the court's perfect body. She breathed around it, as if she could fall into that narrow disobedience. Cashin's voice carried like polished steel. He did not accuse her of disobedience, too common, too small. He told a prettier lie. A respectable beta from a neighboring march had offered for her, he said, and Leora had toyed with him, leading him into embarrassing delusions, staining Drev honor, jeopardizing an alliance. The words stacked like bricks, walling her into a shape she'd never been. Murmurs curdled to contempt. A disordered Omega threatened the order men loved. Have you nothing to say? Cashin's question was a net designed to tear. Leora shook her head. His eyes flared, he wanted tears, please, a performance he could step on. His hands shot out, not to strike, no, he grabbed her chin, talons digging, and forced her face up. Look at me when I speak to you. The slap came like a clean cut. Heat sprayed across her cheekbone, sound shrank to a ringing thread. Silence landed. It did not drift, it hit the room like winter. Leora's breath snagged. The circle of gazes pressed like stones. Cashin's fingers still pinched her jaw, claiming the moment like a trophy. A new sound rose, too low to be human, deep as a drum under the earth. The hair along Leora's arms stood. The throne's shadow leaned forward. Chapter 3, The King Who Promised an Ending. Rorick Thane stood from the obsidian chair as if the mountain itself chose to move. He was all contained force, shoulders like ramparts, hands scarred from wars the historians beautified, dark hair falling into a brow carved by too many storms. His eyes, strange, burning amber, fastened on Cashin's grip. "Release her," he said. Not loud. Just final. Cashin's fingers flinched open. Masked respect slid across his face. "Your Majesty, a private correction within my household." Rorick descended the dais. The court held its breath. He stopped a step away from Leora and Cashin and took in the red mark blooming on Leora's cheek. When he spoke again, the words were flint on steel. "Touch her again," he said, each syllable a promised grave, "and I will end you." A shiver passed through the benches, awe, fear, arousal, outrage, pack emotions braided in a single exhale. Rorick turned his head, and for the first time his gaze met Leora's. The world rethreaded. Not recognition, never that simple. Something older. A pressure inside her sternum, a note that had always been vibrating finally becoming audible. "Mine," said a voice that belonged to no language. She didn't know if it came from him or from the part of her she kept quiet to survive. The king faced the dais. "This farce ends. By my authority, the Omega Leora veil is removed from Lord Drev's custody. She will be under royal protection until the court completes an inquiry into abuse." A swell of protest crested, and broke on the simple wall of Rorick's presence. Law bent for power. Men told stories later to pretend it hadn't. Cashin's jaw worked. He bowed because the floor demanded it. "As my king decrees." Two of the high guard flanked Leora with soft hands and iron bodies. Rorick's gaze returned to her once, brief, burning. A command lived there, and a plea he'd never voice. "Come," he said. "You will not sleep in a house where you are struck." Chapter 4, Thornkeep, Stone, Wind, and Teeth. Thornkeep did not rise from the mountain, it seemed to grow out of it like a black-barked tree, roots sunk down to the world's old fires. Narrow windows bit moonlight into shards. The bridge was a spine of iron. Wolves watched from the parapets, some with fur, some with faces. The palace smelled of leather and cold. Servants moved like careful thoughts. Rorick led Leora past a great hearth where antlers webbed the stone and up a stair that circled a shaft of darkness. He opened a door carved with a running wolf and stood aside. The rooms beyond were not gilded like tales promised. Warm, yes, a long table strewn with maps and knives, a banked fire, a bed heaped with furs, a balcony that threw stars into her eyes. But everything here had edges. Even the air felt trained. "You will be safe," Rorick said. "Safe," Leora repeated, the word sour and sweet. "Or confined?" He considered that, then nodded once. "Both. There are those in these halls who would hurt you to hurt me. You leave only with escort. If you must hate a cage, hate one lined with silk less than one lined with fists." She should have cowed. Instead, something defiant lifted its head in her. "I don't hate cages," she said. "I draw doors." His mouth almost, curved. Then the weather closed in again. "Eat. Sleep. Any servant here answers to you. Not to Drev." He turned to go. Leora found courage like a splinter and pressed it deeper. "Why?" she asked. "Why interfere?" Rorick paused in the doorway. The fire licked his jaw in copper. "Because this is my court," he said, "and I am tired of blood that pretends to be discipline." A beat. "Softer, because I heard the sound you made when he struck you." After he left, the quiet thickened. Leora stood on the balcony, wind combing her hair, mountain dark swallowing the city's glow. She wasn't free. But the world had tilted, and something heavy inside her had slid against something hot. Sparks. Chapter 5, A Library Made of Bones and Memory. The palace library was a cathedral of hush. Shelves rose like trees, ladders leaned like spears. Between cases of treaties and harvest ledgers nestled a door with a bronze latch worn smooth by those who liked secrets. Leora found it on the second morning because silence always tells where its masters hide. She slipped inside to a smaller, older room. The floor dipped, the ceiling arched low. The books here wore skins that weren't meant for books. A stone basin sat in the center, lip carved in an alphabet that tried not to be read. You shouldn't be here alone. The voice came warm and dry. A woman in ink-stained sleeves appeared from between stacks, hair rope-braided, eyes sharp with surviving other people's messes. Archivist Mir. The king permits me to bite anyone who misshelves. Who are you? Leora Vale. Ah. Mir took her in the way healers do, pulse, posture, the ghost of a bruise. We keep 3 kinds of history, child. What happened, what men say happened, and what the stones remember. The last hurts. Leora's gaze snagged on the basin. What does that hold? Moonwater, Mir said. Dreams. Lies that tell the truth. The Thane line keeps its oldest records where the dead can argue. Leora reached, touched. Cold climbed her wrist like a promise. Images stabbed, a woman crowned in thorns of light, a wolf's shadow moving wrong, a king on his knees, hands covered in blood that wasn't all his. She pulled back, breath ragged. Most don't look twice, Mir murmured. You will be trouble. Trouble finds me, Leora said. I barely have to move. Mir's mouth twitched. If you must drown, at least read first. She handed Leora a narrow ledger bound in gray hide. Lineages. The council pretends blood is a wall. Sometimes it's a door. Leora set the ledger down unopened when a scent cut the air, pine after rain, iron, a warmth under winter. A shadow blocked the doorway. Rorik leaned there like a decision after a sleepless night. Hungry minds fall down holes, he said. Then throw me a rope, Leora answered, surprising them both. Chapter 6, The Rival Who Smiled Like a Knife. Courts are made of pressures, and the first crack appeared in the shape of Varen Locke, Alpha of Emberfell, silver hair slicked back, eyes like ice on a river about to break. He found Leora in the outer library 2 days later, where the shelves smelled less of bone and more of beeswax. Well. The king's thunderbolt, he purred, stepping too close. We all wondered what spell you cast to make him, how did the whispers put it, forget himself. Leora eased a book between them like a wall. I cast nothing. Perhaps you mistake decency for sorcery. Varen laughed, soft and ugly. He reached, brushed knuckles against her forearm. Decency is not the king's reputation. Something hit the stacks hard enough to sneeze dust. Rorik was there, no warning, no courtly preface, fisting Varen's collar and slamming him into the oak. Books avalanched. Varen's feet lifted clean off the rug. Do you prefer to live with all your bones touching? Rorik asked, voice low enough to make the shelves lean. Varen choked a smile. Ah. So she is a spell. Rorik's other hand rose, and for a beat Leora saw the future written, blood, broken teeth, a precedent you don't come back from. The beast stood up behind his eyes, black and bright. Rorik, Leora said, and her own audacity startled her. She stepped closer as if approaching a wild thing at the tree line. Put him down. The amber flared, narrowed, breathed. Rorik shoved Varen away instead of through. The alpha staggered, smart enough to make retreat look like dignity. When they were alone among the fallen books, Rorik turned, jaw tight. You don't leave your rooms without escort, I said. I was in a library, Leora answered. Guards frighten the older volumes. His cheek twitched, anger or a laugh he refused to feed. There are wolves here who will hurt you to hurt me. Don't offer your throat. I'm tired of living like one, she said softly. He went very still. The part of him he locked behind chains looked out. And then he looked away. By week's end, Rorik had grown colder by composition. He arrived with Lady Lysandra of the Glass March on his arm, tall, soldiery, carved in frost. He walked the garden paths with her where anyone might linger and happened to linger longer. He dined with her at a small table in a big room. Servants told the walls so the walls could tell the halls. Leora watched from a balcony recessed enough to hide a heart. Jealousy was an acid she hadn't expected to own. She did not hate Lysandra. She hated how her own body betrayed her, tight chest, a flush that had nothing to do with firelight. But when Lysandra's hand slid down Rorik's sleeve, something truer than hurt flashed. His muscles went stone-hard under leather, pupils pinning, nostrils flaring. A growl lived in his throat. He gentled it into a cough. He shifted away, not enough to slight a guest, enough to keep a promise his body had already made without him. A lie revealed itself. His distance was not disinterest, it was a shield raised very high. Leora turned from the balustrade and felt a new steadiness stack up inside. Quiet anger, yes, but also a sharpening of the sense that she'd been walking blindfolded through a trap. If he would not tell her the shape of it, she would trace it herself. The old ledger waited for her like a held breath. Lineages, Mir had said with a librarian's boredom that hides reverence. Leora lit a single lamp, closed the door, and opened the book. She found her mother's hand recorded in neat strokes, her father's in a flourish a little too proud for a soldier. Beside her mother's name, a faded symbol curled, a crescent bound in thorns. Someone had tried to scrape it away, the page scarred white. A second hand, not the scribe's, had added a line in ink gone brown, lumen lupin. Old words don't like being translated because people use them wrong. Leora's throat went dry. Moonwolf. Lycan, no, older, Lycara. The first line blessed by the goddess, if you believed the bedtime stories people stopped telling after someone powerful frowned. A shadow fell across the page. A palm slammed the ledger shut so hard the lamp hiccuped. Out, Rorik said, voice rough. He looked, not furious. Frightened. Real fear, raw as a skin knee, flickered in the gold of his eyes and was smothered. What is lumen lupin? Leora demanded, pulse thundering. What are you keeping under our feet? Why do the stones whisper and why do you flinch when someone touches you who isn't? She bit the word me in half. You don't know the games you're walking through, he said, stepping in until the bookcase behind her pressed patterns into her spine. Secrets are buried because they bite. Leave them. I have a right to my mother's name. She set a palm to his chest. His heart thudded too fast. So did hers. There was a moment, hot, reckless, where his gaze fell to her mouth like fate looking at a door. He tore himself back as if from a cliff. Go, he said, hoarse. And don't come back here. Not alone. She fled, but she didn't leave empty. She carried a word that would not stop burning. Chapter 7, Whispers and Knives. Plots like to be overheard. Leora learned that walking aimless corridors with purpose, listening to the seams of the palace speak. Hall stones keep heat and secrets. If you stand very still and lean a little, they sigh the last things men said while they thought no one dared hear. Unstable, someone murmured behind the council chamber door. Lord Aldervoss, elder, iron gray, voice that could talk a room into the river. He threw lock against a bookcase because the cur looked toward the girl. We invoke old law, said another. Challenge. A throne is not a kennel for a beast. 3 days, Alder said. At the festival. Witnesses. We break him clean. Leora didn't understand the whole plan, but she understood the shape, remove the king, use the omega as pretext and proof. She waited for Rorik that evening like a spark waits for kindling and poured the overheard words out in a rush. His face did not change. He listened as a wall listens, solid, refusal built in. When she finished, he said only, you will concern yourself with your meals and your sleep. You will not play courier for whispers. The dismissal cut deeper than Cassion's palm. Hurt lit into anger, and then doused itself into cold. The next day he paraded distance like armor, Lysandra on his arm, laughter he didn't deserve in his throat. Leora watched, learned, and stopped mistaking masks for faces. The accusation was a theater that needed props. The council produced them. A crude doll bound with a lock of dark hair found in Leora's trunk. A servant girl coached into trembling through a story of chanting. An old law dragged into sunlight, any charge of witchcraft warranted immediate trial. They burst into Leora's rooms while Rorik argued troop numbers in the war chamber. Lord Alder held the seal like a knife. By the council's authority. Guards seized her. She cried out, not words, just the sound Rorik had named in the hall. He came like a storm breaking a ridge, tore the door from its hinges, filled the threshold with anger measured to a killing edge. Release her. The law binds us all, Alder said with a grandfather's patience. The puppet lay on a velvet cushion like a saint's relic. Do you place yourself above it, Majesty? A heartbeat. A flicker, doubt, or the weight of too many knives behind too many smiles. Leora saw that half-second shiver in his eyes and something in her went still and cold. They took her. In the corridor shadow as the guards dragged her past, Cassion stepped from a doorway and brushed her shoulder with mock comfort. Your mother hummed little spells too, he whispered, and slid a narrow dagger from his sleeve just enough to show blackened steel under moonlight. The blade drank light like poison. The cell hated hope on principle. Damp wrote its name on the stones 1,000 different ways. Chains bit until wrists forgot they were wrists. Leora tried to swallow, her throat knew only metal and fear. The trial was a straight line to dawn and a block. Above, a different storm eroded its walls. Rorik's hesitation had lasted a blink, his self-loathing lasted a war. He stopped being a king and became an avalanche. Iron tore. Men landed against stone as if thrown by the mountain itself. He reached her cell, ripped the bars loose, and cradled her with hands too gentle for what they'd just done. I'm sorry, he said, voice ruined. I am, God's, Leora. She didn't answer. She had nothing left that wanted to. The beast knocked at his bones. Pain rippled through him as he held her, he gritted it back, walked, half-carried her through servant corridors he hadn't used since boyhood. When they burst into a forgotten courtyard, torches sprang up like teeth. Alder waited with a dozen elite. Silver gleamed. The fight was short, brutal, unfair. Rorik was a storm with its tether cut, but storms need sky and he had only bodies. The silver-laced blade swept, kissed his side, and fire crawled under his skin. He dropped to a knee. Blood-soaked leather. The guards closed. A voice lilted from the dark like poison. Cassion. Leave them, he told Alder. Let the work finish. The elite melted away. Cassion approached, thoughtful as a priest considering a lamb. He spoke softly to Leora, to the ruin in her eyes. Do you want a final truth? He held up the dagger. Wolfsbane slicked its edge like oil. This corrected your mother. And now. Cold punched into Leora's belly. She did not feel the cut so much as the world growing distant. Cassion stepped back into shadow, satisfied. Leora crawled toward Rorik because even dying has one direction. He lifted his head to meet her, horror carving him new. She folded against him. Her breath faltered. Not your fault, she managed, and closed her eyes on the lie and the truth. He broke. What stood up in him was not a man. Chapter 8, Moonborn. Grief opened the last lock. The beast came through. Bones unspooled, shape ran like wax and froze in a nightmare mold. The howl shook dust from tapestries 3 levels up. In the middle of it, the moon thickened. Light pooled around Leora's body, silver as remembered milk. It slid into the wound like a thread being pulled home. It found something in her blood and listened and answered. Death loosened her, the light pulled her back. The first breath was a knife, then a gift. Leora sat up in a spill of light, the world unbearably vivid, edges crisp, scents like stories, sounds shown in color. A faint sigil glimmered on her skin where the blade had been, crescent caught in thorns. Across the yard, the beast raged at ghosts. Guards flinched. Men shouted. Rorik was gone under it, lost in the great black river. Rorik, Leora said, rising. Her voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. It was the rope he had once refused to throw and now could not reach for unless she cast it. She walked toward ruin with her hand open. Home, she told the monster. I'm here. It charged. It stopped. Heat wavered off its breath. She pressed her palm to coarse, bloody fur. Silver flared between them, a bridge, a bridle, a mercy. The beast fought transformation like drowning fights air, then yielded bone by screaming bone. A man collapsed at her feet, shaking, bleeding, shamed, alive. He laid his head in her lap like a penitent. The curse did not leave, it slept with one eye open, and now that I watched her too. Mine, he said, broken and believing for the first time. She did not correct him. Ours, she whispered back. Dawn bled cold. Rumor moved faster than light, the Omega lives, the beast bows, the king breathes. Loyalists stepped out of doorways they'd been punished into. Traitors sharpened the second set of knives. Rorik woke with the steadiness of a man who has burned through choice. He strapped on black battle armor as if suiting his bones. Leora pushed aside silk a servant offered and asked for leather that would let her run and kneel and fight. They did not summon an army. They walked. The great hall still wore scars. The same circle where Cashin's hand had cracked Leora's face now reflected bootsteps as Rorik and Leora crossed its threshold side by side. Alder stood at the dais with Cashin and a ring of their loyal steel. Varen tried to make his face brave and only got to pretty. This is treason dressed as law, Rorik said, voice even. So let's take the costume off. Alder flicked 2 fingers. Swords drew. Rorik moved like a storm that had learned to take corners. He did not fight wild. He fought like someone who had learned the beast's rhythm and could put a bridle on it when it lunged. Men went down and stayed down. Leora threaded the chaos toward Cashin. He grabbed Ronan Varen and shoved him forward as a shield, the way men who never loved anything use anything. Going somewhere, uncle? Leora said. She slid into his path, death quiet. You were dead, he whispered. You aren't very observant, she said, and stripped the blackened dagger from his hand when he lunged. The final blow she gave him wasn't theatrical. It was precise, clean, and ended a history. Around them, the last of Alder's guard broke on Rorik's will. Silence stacked on silence until the room could hold it no longer and spilled into kneeling. Varen went down first, forehead to stone, voice cracked. Majesty. My queen. Mercy. One by one, wolves bent. Steel clattered. The hall that made you small made a king human when he turned. Rorik faced Leora, and the noise in the room drew back like a tide. He had blood along his cheek and a smile in his eyes he didn't know he owned. The court watched 100 futures and didn't understand any of them. He went to one knee. He took her hand as if it were a relic and a rope. He bowed his head, not because men watched but because this is what you do when the person who saved your soul is standing upright and looking you in the face. Leora's throat closed around too many things. She set her palm on his hair, an anointing reversed, a crowning of the kneeler. Stand, she said. Not I forgive you or I own you. Stand. Partner. They turned to the court together. This time when the pack howled, it was not fear or fury. It was relief. It sounded like a nation learning to breathe with 2 lungs again. Chapter 9, Sun and Moon. The coronation didn't glitter, it burned clean. No tiered cakes of ceremony. No speeches that tried to domesticate what had happened. Rorik wore a circlet dulled by use. Leora's crown was woven silver thin as frost. When metal touched hair, the bond between them flared visible, gold and silver light washing the crowd, settling like blessing on heads bowed by something other than terror. They were not king and shadow. Sun and moon fit better. One warmed, one steered the tide. Between them, the curse crouched and watched and learned new rules. Justice followed. Alder went to stone, condemned by law he misused. Varen swore service with a blade across his palm and never met Leora's eyes longer than respectful. The houses that had watched and measured and waited were given work to do that hurt their pride and fed their people. At night, on the balcony that had once been a precipice for despair, Rorik wrapped arms around Leora's waist and rested his chin on her shoulder. The city breathed below. Wolves ran the ridge with joy instead of urgency. "Does it end?" he asked into her hair. He didn't mean treason. He meant the thing in him, the eye under sleep. "No," she said. "Truth was mercy. But it obeys." He huffed something that might grow into laughter. "Who taught you to command monsters?" She thought of the attic, of drawing doors on walls and believing hard enough to walk through. "I did." Peace is a labor, not a lullaby. They learned to govern like they'd learned to touch, careful, sometimes clumsy, always honest after. Leora rebuilt the archives where history could stop lying. She sat with the old stones and coaxed out names forgotten on purpose. She found a ritual knotted wrong 3 generations back and unpicked it thread by thread until the pack's children stopped waking with night terrors that smelled of silver. Rorik trained squads to move fast where borders thinned in storm season. He went to the villages himself, shook hands that had only ever held out petition, and listened when farmers told him how wolf baners grew this year and why that mattered. On lamplit nights, he read while Leora sketched, wolves that weren't weapons, forests that didn't have to hide a body. Sometimes the beast paced under his skin, sometimes moonlight braided calm through him like cool water. When nightmares took him by the throat, she woke him by saying his name like it was a place you could walk to and sit down. When grief visited, which it will, because winning doesn't resurrect, it found them both and found them ready. They kept one promise from the first day: no more cages lined with silk or fists. Only doors, drawn and then opened. And when a child was born to them under a harvest moon, the city howled so loud the mountain smiled. Amber eyes blinked up at Leora's silver-flecked ones, and the beast inside Rorik lay down and slept like a dog warm by a hearth. The stories later said the savage king married a witch and was tamed. Stories are lazy. What happened was harder and better. A man learned to be a weapon without becoming one. A woman with charcoal on her fingers redrew the borders of a kingdom. And the moon, patient old witness, wrote both their names into the water's skin where the river runs fastest and truest. The end. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope you enjoyed.